Why are they obsessed with controlling your womb? Reproductive control is not about morality or babies. It's about power. Always has been, always will be. Welcome back to Stay at Home Feminist. Your soft girl era starts here, along with the fall of the patriarchy. Today, we're digging into some very important historical context of some of the scary laws, scary agendas, scary rhetoric we're seeing today when it comes to controlling women and their bodies. From slavery to eugenics to Dobbs to the latest attacks on IVF, let's get into the centuries of this political agenda, because what's happening today isn't new. It's just another iteration, another version of the patriarchy and of society at large, trying to control women, trying to make women second-class citizens. Been there, done that. Why are we acting like we don't know this is what they want? They've been very clear about this for centuries. When talking about the history of controlling women's bodies, there's so many places we could start. But when I'm thinking about it as it relates to the United States, I think it's so important to look at slavery and reproductive exploitation, especially today when our government and our schools are trying to erase critical race theory. And there's this notion that talking about slavery sometimes makes white kids feel guilty, like whatever. The reason we should talk about history as a whole, including slavery, which is a part of American history, is so that we understand the historical context and certain foundations that have laid the groundwork for societal norms today. Just like this is true when it comes to civil rights, health disparities, and so many aspects in the way that racism is just systemic here in the US. Let's look at it as it relates to reproductive freedom and reproductive justice, because it's important to understand how the US has used forced birth in the past, to understand why they might want forced birth right now. As we know, during the hundreds of years that slavery was alive and well in the United States, enslaved Black women were forced into pregnancies, and those children, like the enslaved pregnant women, became property. Really think about what this meant. Enslaved Black women's bodies were the economy. Forced births meant more property and more production for the enslavers. More horribly, these women didn't have a choice. Not only were they forced into pregnancy, they were forced into non-consensual, I can't say it on the internet, the video is going to take down. They were forced into non-consensual sex, also known as grape, just to have their children sold as commodities. That's OG family values right there when it comes to the US. So just let the reality of that and the fact that that went on for hundreds of years sink in. I think it's really, really important that we don't dismiss how disgusting that was, because I think there's so many things that Americans see happening today, or sometimes I talk about how miscarriages are being criminalized or this and that, and people are in my comment section like, what are you talking about? That's not happening. That would never happen in America. Well, let's think about what has happened in America before we're so quick to say that could never happen here, because we have a really dark history. And, it is what it is. But if we don't learn about it, it's harder to grow from it. So let's grow from this. Let's not make forced births a thing anymore. Okay? I mean, that's just like surface level of how men in power have thought about women's bodies and using reproductive exploitation to make profits, to control people, to punish people. And when we tie that into today's anti-abortion rhetoric, it's pretty easy to make some parallels. Today's rhetoric really wants women reduced to baby making machines for the state, which is why it's so important that we understand the very, very dark history that this country has with forced pregnancy. I've talked in other episodes about how high the maternal mortality rate is in the United States, and it's especially high for Black women. Like, that all starts to make a lot of sense when you look at the historical implications of pregnant Black women in the US, all the way back to the context of slavery. But even since then, I think with that being said, abortion activists had been saying before the fall of Roe, the people that are going to be harmed by this the most most are going to be Black women. And the women who have suffered and are not alive because of these abortion bans have been Black women, predominantly. Women of all ethnicities and races have suffered because of this, been jailed, been denied care, lost fallopian tubes because they couldn't get the help they needed for unviable pregnancies or whatever. But the women who have died have been Black. And that didn't come as a surprise to people who had been advocating for reproductive health, because it is very on trend for the way things work in this country. To add to that, maternal and infant mortality rates have increased dramatically in states with restrictive abortion bans. So yeah, I've talked about that a lot in other podcasts. Just in case you're just tuning in for the first time, let's add some of that knowledge into this as we look at the larger context of some of these things. But as we know, with America's racist history, it did not stop at slavery. There's been a lot of time between now and slavery, and a lot of that has been packed with very racist under and overtones. As it relates to forced birth and reproductive justice, it's predominantly shown up through eugenics and through sterilization campaigns. Did you know that in the early 1900s, states passed laws to sterilize poor women, indigenous women, women of color, predominantly Black women, and disabled women? Until essentially the 1970s, states sterilized women who were unfit to be mothers. Unfit was often an umbrella term for Black women, indigenous women, poor women, and or disabled women. California alone during this time sterilized over 20,000 women with this program they had. And as late as the 1970s, indigenous women were sterilized without consent at alarming rates. By alarming rates, I mean like 25%. A fourth of indigenous women in the US were sterilized, non-consensually sterilized at that. That's not ancient history. That's your mom or your grandma's era. And the language of undesirable mothers still echoes today, especially when it comes to the way conservatives want to strip SNAP programs, welfare programs, things like that. When conservatives say kids shouldn't have free lunches, when people are trying to take away child tax credit programs or others, like or WIC, or other social supports for poor families, single mothers, things of that sort, they're recycling this eugenics rhetoric. They're pushing out this narrative that you shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them. When really, it's like, why is it so hard to afford children here? Why is childcare so difficult? Why does it cost $30,000 minimum to give birth? Instead of tackling the real issues that make it so, that point out how unsupported mothers are here, we are attacking families for being poor. Give kids free lunch at school, for sakes, and realize that calling people who take social supports or take advantage of social programs that help boost them up economically and help their kids, which helps reduce crime in the future, which helps reduce poverty, which is like helps reduce mental health and wellness and all of these things these studies have shown. When you call those people welfare queens, when you make it derogatory that people are receiving these crucial social supports, you are applying eugenics logic. So just don't do that. Women have very recently achieved the right to control when they are family planning. And now already we're removing those protections swiftly in this country. It wasn't until 1965 that married women could get access to contraception. 1965 is not that long ago, guys. And it wasn't until 1972 that unmarried women could get contraception. So until the 70s, women could not control family planning in that way, like preventatively. And it wasn't until the historic Roe v. Wade in 1973 that abortion rights were recognized and protected. My point is that reproductive freedom is less than 60 years old. It's younger than our current president by a good 20 some odd years. And it's already being attacked and rolled back in very, very alarming ways. So don't tell me the state is not obsessed with controlling our wombs. They are. They are obsessed with it. They will not leave us alone. So that's a little historical context to catch us up on the full-blown crisis that we're in today. Not to be an alarmist, but from the bans we've seen to attacks on IVF, reproductive health is consistently under attack today. When Roe was overturned a few years ago in 2022, abortion became no longer federally protected and it went back to the states. Now, there are 12 states with near total abortion bans and 4 others with 6-week bans, which most women women don't know they're even pregnant at 6 weeks. Just so the 6-week ban makes a little more sense to people who know nothing about this but have really strong opinions. Most miscarriages happen before 8 weeks. When you're pregnant and trying to get pregnant, doctors won't even see you until like 8 weeks earliest, because there's like not a gestational sac or heartbeat that you can really see normally up until then. And it's very, very likely, not very, very likely. And miscarriages are so common, and they're so common in that time frame. So just so you understand, medical professionals like don't even take your pregnancy seriously until 8 weeks minimum. It's usually you go in at like 9 or 10 weeks, 8 weeks earliest. And just a reminder, about 1 in every 4 pregnancy ends up in a miscarriage. That's how common they are. So like take a second, take a breath. When you see these headlines, when these bills are called like heartbeat bill, and you're like, oh my gosh, like all these women want to kill their babies, blah, blah, blah. Like take a breath, because that's not real. Okay. And even if it was, which it's not, like, why are you obsessed with what that woman wants to do with her life? As we know, these bans have been incredibly harmful for women. And that, I think, is what is left out of the conversation. They're bad for women's rights as a whole. They're bad for reproductive justice as a whole. But it's so frustrating to see people with such strong opinions about this and not understand that this is harming so many women across the board, but it's really harming women who want to have kids. And I think there's this idea that, you know, we have our president saying things in a presidential debate like late term abortion, post-birth abortion, or whatever he called it. Like there's this idea that we need to stop people from like unaliving like actual children. That's not what an abortion is, first of all. But also, again, let's look at maternal health. Let's look at how this is affecting women across the board. And I think often left out of this conversation is how unsafe these bans make it for women who want to have kids. There's a very interesting legal case that was brought against Texas, who has a near total abortion ban. It was Zorowski v. Texas. And this case basically puts like a face to the cruelty of these bans. The Center for Reproductive Justice filed this case on behalf of Texas women who were denied life-saving care. It started with 7 women, but quickly grew to 22 plaintiffs. That's 22 women who nearly had to become unalived or leave their state to get medical care that should have been standard. Amanda Zorowski, the lead plaintiff, was 18 weeks pregnant when she essentially started to go into labor. You know anything about pregnancy, 18 weeks is way too early, and little baby's not going to survive that. When she went to the hospital, it quickly became clear that her pregnancy was not viable. But because they could still detect a fetal heartbeat, Texas law forced the doctors to send her home until she was sick enough to get the help she needed. 3 days later, once she was in septic shock, her body is going into sepsis because of how untreated she was, how unhelped she was, how severe this got for her. She went back to the ICU and was fighting for her life. And they finally gave her the life-saving reproductive care she needed. Amanda survived, but it left her with a very, very severe complication in her fallopian tube. And now if she wants to have kids, she has to do IVF because of the damage. So she almost lost her life, and she almost lost her ability to even have kids because doctors wouldn't treat her for an unviable pregnancy that they already established that was unviable. Think about being 18 weeks pregnant. By 18 weeks, like you're excited. Like you've told your loved ones, like you've announced it, you know, you're feeling confident in this pregnancy. You're probably picking out paint colors for your baby room wall. How devastating that must be to find out it's not a viable pregnancy. And then on top of dealing with that loss and that grief, you have to navigate this horrible healthcare system, which healthcare in America is already so difficult to navigate. But now you're having to navigate these atrocious laws that say, you got to be on death's door before we can help you with that. Like, it's unacceptable. Another plaintiff in this case was Lauren Miller. She's one of the 22 women. She's from Dallas. She was pregnant with twins. And basically she was battling this like extreme sickness that could kill her. And at 12 weeks found out that one of the twins had a fatal genetic condition. What you do in that situation is clear. It's a procedure called a fetal reduction procedure. And it gives the other twin a chance and helps her stay alive. Like that's obviously the thing to do. That's what medical professionals would advise you to do. But Texas banned it. She couldn't get that help. Even though one of the twins was an unviable pregnancy because of this genetic condition, even though her life was at risk and her other baby's life is at risk, they won't do this procedure. So Lauren had to leave the state. She had to go to Colorado to get this life-saving care. This is what pro-life looks like today. Again, look at this situation. What is pro-life about denying care that is gonna harm the woman and the other viable baby that she's carrying? Making women leave their state to survive is not okay. Forcing a mother to risk her life, spend thousands of dollars isn't pro-family. It's not pro-life. It seems that these like Republican-led, super conservative religious states that have these really strict bans are very like pro-family values, pro this and that. Like this doesn't seem like good family values to me at all. It's like pro-control, not pro-family. Just so you get an understanding of like how it got so bad in Texas and why these 22 women were denied life-saving care and almost didn't make it or had to leave the state to get that life-saving care. In the year since Roe was overturned, 12 states passed near total abortion bans. So this is just coming out of Texas. This is happening across the country. And Texas was one of the harshest bans. It was banned from conception unless basically you're literally on your deathbed. And if you break the law, doctors could face a $100,000 fine or even life in prison. Doctors can't do their job and are sending women away and putting them in danger because if they don't, they could go to prison for the rest of their life. Like, come on. And this isn't just pregnant women. This sort of cruel concepts being applied here expands into IVF and miscarriage care as well. In 2024, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos are children, which meant IVF treatments stopped immediately once this ruling came out, because the ruling meant that embryos should receive the same amount of care as an actual child. So if you mishandled an embryo, which IVF clinics often throw out batches of embryos as part of procedure, but if they did, they could be persecuted under Alabama's Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. Do you see why it's not okay to not know the difference between an embryo or a fetus and a child? Like they are two different things. And to act like they're not isn't helpful. It's just ignorant. The Alabama governor later signed an IVF bill that would give immunity to patients and providers that would practice IVF. So they kind of like canceled each other out, but like, why did we need to get here anyways? Like what? IVF is so important. Unless you've been in the position where you've needed to get IVF, maybe your opinion about it doesn't matter. These policies are just cruel. I don't see any point for them other than to be cruel. Speaking of cruel policies, miscarriages are now being criminalized. Women are being questioned, investigated, and even jailed for pregnancy loss. A Tennessee woman, Brittany Pula, was convicted of manslaughter after she miscarried at 17 weeks. And what's crazy about seeing this happen is like, again, let's look at some historical context about how miscarriages are being criminalized, because these laws initially came out to protect women and are now being used to punish them for something that they don't always have control over. Let's talk about fetal assault laws. They exist in at least 38 states, and on paper, they're supposed to protect pregnant women from abusers who hurt them. That's essentially how they came to be in 2004 after Lacey Peterson, who was pregnant, was unalived by her husband. It's a crazy story. There's some documentaries on it. Go watch that. If you're a true crime girly, essentially after that, Congress rushed in with a federal law and a lot of the states followed suit. But today, almost over 20 years later, those same laws are being used against pregnant women themselves. If you miscarry or have a stillbirth, prosecutors can twist these laws to charge you as a pregnant woman. Imagine losing your pregnancy and then facing prison time for it. This is especially true if the woman was using drugs. And obviously, I mean, I don't condone pregnant women using drugs. I advise against it through and through. But we have a drug crisis in this country, which isn't being treated. And we have this other rollback of healthcare protections for women. And it seems like people get so sensationalized about certain things. They don't look at like the root causes and what could actually fix it. And that's like my main beef with like the pro-life movement, is because I'm like, okay, if you really wanted less abortions to happen, like why wouldn't you care about like reproductive health education? Why wouldn't you pass out condoms? If you really cared about women not taking drugs that could harm the fetus when pregnant, why wouldn't you care about sobriety and like social safety nets that help keep people not addicted to drugs? Like addiction is a disease. Like why are we criminalizing people with a disease? Do you see what I'm saying? Like I don't see how anything you're doing is actually going to help you get the results you want. All I'm seeing is it being used as a tool to punish women. And as I said, miscarriages happen in about 1 in 4 women. They're common. And instead of compassion and medical care, women are getting criminally investigated? Come on. Meanwhile, the number one killer of pregnant people in the US, do you want to guess what it is? It's not drugs, it's homicide. Yeah, getting unalived by men. That's the one. So maybe we should focus on that a little bit more and stop punishing women for choices that you don't agree with. Because I really don't agree with men killing women. I really don't agree with that. I really don't think it's okay that men are killing pregnant women. So why don't we go after that with the same veracity that we go after policing women's bodies? Yeah? Doesn't sound like fun to you to police men who are harming women? That's not what we want to do. We just want to go after women? Cool. Got it. These laws that were supposed to protect women from real violence are now punishing women while real danger goes unchecked. Brittany Pula miscarried between 15 or 17 weeks while pregnant. Prosecutors argued that she used meth during her pregnancy, and they blamed her loss on that and charged her with manslaughter. She was convicted and sentenced to prison for 4 years, even though the medical examiner in the case couldn't confirm that meth caused the miscarriage. And then there's Marsha Jones from Alabama. She survived a shooting. She was shot while pregnant. And she survived, but her fetus didn't. Prosecutors indicted her for manslaughter because she was shot by someone else. They said that she picked a fight while 5 months pregnant, so she should go to jail. But the actual shooter was cleared. Like, he wasn't charged at all. And this woman who was shot and it resulted in her losing her baby gets charged. That's just so insane to me. I just feel like that shows the priorities of this country so well. Like, the charges were later dropped, thank God. But the message is loud and clear. Our society is obsessed with holding pregnant women accountable, and not the men who harm us, and not the societal conditions that harm us, and not like the other factors that play into this. And it's exactly why punishing women does not make sense. These prosecutions predominantly go after poor women, women of color. They turn miscarriage or addiction or trauma into criminal acts instead of moments of care. Meanwhile, the leading cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. Like, really think about the ways that we have normalized protecting fetuses by persecuting women instead of punishing real violence. Anyways, all that to say is fetal assault laws weren't written to criminalize pregnant people. And it's like very dystopian that that's how they're being used now. It's scary to think about how birth control might be next. We saw when Roe was overturned, there being mentions that they might revisit Griswold, which was the case that gave us contraception rights. GOP-led states are already talking about restricting IUDs and Plan B. So yeah, just pay attention, keep your eyes open, because this control doesn't start or stop with abortion. It's about narrowing path to bodily autonomy, to family planning as a whole. Because as I said, it's about power and control. I think the rhetoric of control is very important to also take a look at. Often when I talk about this online, I get incels in my comment section saying things like, well, you should just close your legs. The fact that you think this is all up to women speaks volumes. Also, like, I could be a nun, I could be celibate, I could be a married woman, I could be trying to conceive, like, I could be all these things. I do not want an abortion. I personally would not get an abortion. It doesn't make sense to me that you think because I don't want an abortion that I wouldn't support abortion rights, because it's so much bigger than me. If you don't want an abortion, don't get one. I wouldn't want an abortion at this point in my life. I wouldn't. So I'm not going to get one. But I understand why abortion is healthcare. And if you don't, either don't get one or don't have such a strong opinion about something that you don't understand. Hope this helps. The patriarchy is inherently violent, so we shouldn't be surprised when these like incel manosphere men just are out here toting this inherently violent or misogynist rhetoric. And things like that shift blame onto women while erasing men's role. And we see this time and time again when people talk about reproductive healthcare or reproductive rights in general. Like, these same conservative men pushing these family values are like the ones that crash Grindr when they all meet up in the same city. Does your wife know you use that app? The hypocrisy is like so painful. Speaking of, it's very important that we're all on the same page that these bans aren't going to stop the men who are making these bans from getting their daughters, their wives, or their mistresses abortions, because those will still happen. They're just making it hard for you to get them. It's so frustrating for me to see this pro-life movement that is so inherently anti-child. The same groups of people so supportive in pushing these abortion bans are also cutting SNAP benefits, cutting cutting WIC, cutting child tax credits, free school lunches, like all these very, very important social supports for children. I wish there was a rule that you couldn't be so pro-life if you weren't actually doing anything to help kids or make it easier for women to give birth. Again, highest maternal mortality rate out of developed nations. Like 1 in 5 children in the US live in poverty. So maybe we could care a little bit more about that and a little bit less about forcing pregnancy, about forcing people to give birth. But we don't, because it's not about the children. It's not about the babies. It's about control. Pro-life as a movement is the state's interest. And we see it in the ways that they don't want children to be supported. They want women to be controlled. They want to force women to give birth. And we see it in this like double standard, or like the rhetoric they use, the language they use. We see it time and time again. For example, some of the most restrictive abortion bans have been called the heartbeat bill. As we know, you don't, as a pregnant person, even see your doctor or do an ultrasound at 6 weeks because they probably aren't going to find a heartbeat most of the time. You see your doctor at 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, because that's when they're likely to see it. They talk about how important it is to have family values while separating families because they're immigrants. Like, language is important and your hypocrisy is annoying. That's the point I'm trying to make. And the people who are getting hit hardest by these bans are low-income women and women of color. It can be really impossible to get the reproductive health care you need if you need to leave the state. That involves gas, plane tickets, hotels, taking time off work. Not everyone can do that. I mean, think about, especially if you have other kids, like you need to have someone watch those kids. It's like, that makes it really, really hard to even access that care. It's now such a privilege to be able to even access that care. In the United States, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to be unalived by a pregnancy complication. Forcing birth and not taking reproductive health seriously magnifies this. For the most harmed group in this country as it relates to maternal mortality, which is Black women, but also for all women in this country, forcing birth is not pro-life. It's not saving lives. It's putting people in harm's way, and it can be a death sentence for some women. What is so frustrating about the conversation around abortion and these bans today, especially when people use like religion as a reason, it's like the church didn't care about this for the longest time. This was not a political topic in this country until the 19th century. Abortion used to be totally fine under common law as long as it was before quickening. When thinking about getting an abortion had to do with like quickening, would be like feeling the baby kick. So it would be up to the mom, the woman's discretion, like when that was happening, which put a lot of power in her hands about it, gave her that authority over her own body. And just for context, quickening, when the baby's kicking, is normally somewhere between 16 and 20 weeks. So essentially any time before 16 to 20 weeks, faith, religious traditions, and the law treated early abortion as legal, super duper okay, no big deal. Not only was it not sinful, it was the standard of care. So how did we go from being so chill about abortion to making it so criminalized and scrutinized and such a hot political topic? Well, it all started with the American Medical Association. In 1859, Dr. Horatio Storer, who was a part of the AMA, the American Medical Association, set up a campaign pushing to redefine life starting at conception. That's where this came from, all from this one guy. So instead of life starting at quickening, where you could feel the baby moving, he's like, nope, life starts at conception, and really push this narrative. And he was using the momentum of the AMA and his power to really push each state to start passing anti-abortion laws. This led to 40 new bans between 1860 and 1880. So in those 20 years, Horatio Storer went to work. But these were physicians that were spreading this sort of religious life starts at conception, it's about the soul thing. They weren't like religious people. And the reason physicians wanted to do this is because they wanted to squash the competition. Midwives, who were often women of color, often Black women specifically, were the OG reproductive specialists. And the American Medical Association wanted a monopoly on this. They launched these campaigns to make midwives suddenly immoral or unscientific. All that to say, abortion didn't become a moral crisis because of God or religion. It became one because male doctors saw dollar signs and they wanted to make money and they wanted to establish themselves in their career. Ignore abortion being about morality because anti-abortion came from a business strategy. If abortion was criminal, women had to go to male doctors for reproductive care, for birth control, for whatever. So next time someone says abortion's always been controversial, you know more now. It wasn't. And today we see the way that this sort of rhetoric about it being some moral issue is really taken over. I mean, first of all, there's like this whole crisis fatigue aspect about it. Like there's seemingly like a new something to be worried about when it comes to reproductive care each week. And people numb out, you know? We thought Roe being overturned was going to be like this big horrible thing, and it was, but it was also just like, oh, okay. You know, because what are you going to do? And I think so much of the country has just moved on and let it be normal and just pretended, just kind of swept it under the rug when it is really, really harming so many women. And unfortunately, many people don't even realize that until it affects them personally or someone they know personally. And that's intentional because normalization is how authoritarianism thrives. So we should look out for that. This has also been used to rally certain bases. Evangelicals and far right people are like rallying around family values while cutting family supports, unironically. But like, let's look at this in a more sinister way, because reproductive control is population control, which is very, very in the realm of authoritarian control. This is not some new playbook. When the state wants control, it goes after women's bodies, because controlling reproduction isn't just about morality. It's about controlling the present and the future population, quite literally. In Germany, back in the day, not one specific era that I think you can catch I'm referring to, that the internet might flag this if I say it, abortion and contraception were heavily restricted, especially for Aryan women, because the regime wanted more white German births. And these Aryan women, these white women, were glorified as mothers of the nation. That's what they were called. Meanwhile, Jewish, Roma, and disabled women were being actively sterilized or prevented in other ways from having children. This is the blueprint of reproductive authoritarianism. And we've seen it in Germany back then, but we've also seen it in the US, as I mentioned earlier, with the 25% of indigenous women that were sterilized in the 70s in California alone, forcing the right people to reproduce and stopping the wrong people from reproducing. That's eugenics and borderline ethnic cleansing. So let's not normalize that, okay? Well, am I being dramatic by comparing those two? Because often when we compare that man with a mustache to the orange man in the White House, people are like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, it's not that bad. Okay. Well, the reason I'm comparing that specifically is because it sounds a little familiar to me with some of the things that are coming out of this administration. Remember when J.D. Vance ranted about declining birth rates being a threat to Western civilization? And he said, I want more babies to be in the United States of America. Remember? That's the rhetoric coming from our vice president of this country. Yeah. Or what about Trump's reproductive propaganda that we see often? Let's not forget about the time that this administration floated an incentive like a $5,000 baby bonus and a national medal of motherhood for women with 6 or more children. The $5,000 is laughable when it costs like $30,000 minimum to give birth in this country for one child alone. And it was really easy to sort of mock how out of touch and ridiculous this was. But pay attention to how scarily sinister and how closely this relates or mimics to other authoritarian era rewards for fertility, such as Hitler's Cross of Honor of the German mother. Again, back to what I was saying with them really trying to promote certain women to be moms. Also, we see it a lot in like female conservative spaces. I feel like I'm getting glimpses of it online. I'm not really in this algorithm, but there are a lot of women, and it seems to be this like rhetoric of like, life's so hard these days. Just give up your career and be a mom. That will be great for you. Or women saying stuff like, I saw this one post of this woman being like, yeah, I'm a selfish friend because I have 3 kids. So I just care about my kids and my husband. I'm not going to care about my friends. Like, that's propaganda. And like, your friends are your backbone, and it takes a village to raise kids. So you should care about community. You should care about not just being a mom, being a full person, whatever that looks like for you. If you want to be a stay-at-home mom, great. Like, that's awesome. I don't want to work full time and be a mom personally, but I want a very well-rounded life and not just be held and chained to this one thing. And I think these women, some of them who don't even have kids, I saw at this one conference, it was like this woman who wasn't even a mom and had a full-time job was being like, girlies, quit your job and have kids. It's so easy. Motherhood is hard. It is a grind. It's a lot of work. And I think these women are saying it in this way to younger women will see this and hear this and think like, oh, that's my purpose and that's my calling, and not understand the complexity of it and not understand the context of it. It's not that I'm saying you shouldn't be a mom. I'm not saying that you need to work and be a mom. What I am saying is understand the dog whistles that you're hearing. Understand that having kids is a financial commitment. And if you don't work and you have a kid, you are tied to one man. So be very, very selective with who that man is. And your frontal cortex isn't finalized. Your brain isn't finished growing until you're 25. So maybe some of these lifelong decisions can wait until you're 25. Just be careful. Use discernment. So yeah, just as a reminder, Soviet and Nazi regimes use pro-natalist policies like fertility medals and strict bans to push state control through increased birth rates. Today's policies bear worrying parallels to that point in time. So when this administration starts cooing about more babies to save America, it's not just odd, it's chillingly familiar. The White House floating ideas like baby bonuses and medals for moms is not about freedom or care, it's about control. And yes, it's echoing every other authoritarian regime that prioritized women as incubators and not as people. Abortion bans, IVF crackdowns, attacks on contraception, these are all tools to limit who gets to have a family and under what condition. And let's not miss the racial undertones or the anti-queerness of this all. State restrictions disproportionately affect Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities, while rhetoric about saving birth rates is aimed at white middle-class women. And we're seeing our Supreme Court question marriage equality, which has massive implications, not just for queer people, but for their families. In conclusion, stop centering pro-life arguments about babies. Focus on anatomy, freedom, dignity, because that's what it's about. If they can control your womb, they can control your whole life. So let's stop this, please. Being pro-life, but anti-childcare, anti-lunch programs, and anti-paid leave means you don't care about children. You just care about controlling women. You just care about controlling pregnant people. Same with like being anti-abortion, but pro-death penalty. You're not pro-life. And what can we do as a collective to combat all of this? Speak out, use your voice, educate people, educate yourself, have these conversations with your friends who are women or not. I guess it doesn't have to be women. Also like have these conversations. Yeah. Especially if you're a straight woman in a heterosexual relationship, have these conversations with your partner, especially if it's someone that you could see yourself having kids with one day, or you do have kids with, because as I said, a lot of these bans affect women who want to start a family. Support abortion funds, national, local, anything and everything in between. Push for federal protections. Yes, but also push for state and city protections in state and city elections, because right now federally, like, I don't know, that's kind of a tough one for us currently. Like, let's control what we can control. It's not the goon in the White House. Build solidarity. Reproductive justice isn't just about abortion. It's about healthcare. It's about housing. It's about childcare. It's about dignity. And I know this stuff can be kind of overwhelming with so much going on. That's intentional. So start where you need to. Start small. Small actions really do stack into a cultural momentum. Thank you for joining this episode of Stay at Home Feminist. Like, subscribe, share, do all the things. Comment something you learned. What did you not know going into this? Because I feel like I could talk about reproductive justice all day long. There's so many different layers to this bad boy. So I'm going to keep talking about it, but let me know what you learned and let me know what else you would like to learn. Thank you again for joining. Final thought as we leave here, controlling reproduction is how the patriarchy keeps its boot on our necks. They don't want you free. They want you fertile, broke, and too tired to fight back. But here's the gag. They've tried this before and they'll try it again. And as before, women have burned it all down and fought for what they knew what was right for them. We've always fought back and we will again. And yeah, matriarchy over everything, fam. And if your womb has more rights than you, you are a second-class citizen. Okay. Thanks for joining. Bye.